Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Real Talk with Ben podcast. And I'm so glad you decided to tune in today. Whatever you're doing, wherever you are, I hope that today is an encouragement. I know this is going to be a tougher topic, so I hope that you are encouraged. And maybe you can live it a little bit differently than maybe I chose, or maybe also just maybe get some encouragement. Maybe you're going through something similar, and I really hope you do. And if you're new, my name is Ben, and this is my podcast where I talk about life. I talk about ministry here in Hungary, but ultimately I talk about the glory of God and what he has done in my life and in stories and in things that I've seen here in ministry and also back home. So I hope you enjoy this video. I hope you will get not just this video, but this episode of the podcast. And I hope that you will stay tuned after this episode and for many more. And so with that, let's jump right in. Let's get into it. And so, yeah, it's been an amazing, Sorry, I wanted to turn me down a little bit. So this week has been great. It's been an encouraging week. But it's also been a week that was really something that I have never really talked about on the podcast. I have made videos about it. In fact, this is actually where the start of the Bowden experience, the start of my YouTube started, was really this week, 3 years ago. And so if you're watching or you're listening, you see the title is 3 years later. And I have notes up, so please, if you're watching, I'm trying to stay with it here. But this is going to be a harder episode for myself. I'm going to make a separate video on my YouTube about my grandfather. A separate video, hopefully coming out in the next few days. But tomorrow, you're listening to this on Thursday. If you're listening on Friday, then today. But tomorrow marks 3 years since my grandfather passed away. My grandpa Yoder. And my grandpa Yoder, for those of you that have never met him, if you're in Hungary, then you've never met him. Even if you're in the States, you might not have ever met him. I wanted to talk about just who he was, and then talk about things that I've struggled with, things I've learned, and ways that I've grown. But if you don't know my grandfather, if you never met my grandfather, then I'll tell you this. My grandpa Yoder was the kindest man you'll ever meet. He was a guy that you would see all the time with a smile on his face. He knew everyone in town. I can remember stories stories among stories of just times where us cousins would sit around and grandpa would tell us about Fred from Taylor Street or Fred from Baird Street. You know, that probably wasn't the name, but he knew everyone. My grandfather not only knew everyone, but he tried to treat people with love and respect. Yeah, we're not all perfect, and I'm sure my grandpa made mistakes as well as we all do. But from what I saw and from the way people talked about him, he was a man that truly you wanted to emulate. And I have so many stories, and honestly, I could probably take a whole podcast episode on the stories of my grandfather. But I just want you to know that my grandfather was a man that taught me so much about life. Obviously, I have my dad, and I love my dad. But my grandfather was really like a second father in the sense that he taught me a lot about life. And I'll get into it probably here later on about the things that I've learned and the things that I struggle with today. But from the young age of probably, 5 or 6, I remember just, going out on the farm and following grandpa, watching him work in the barn, watching him with the cows and the hay. And, you watch it as a young kid, and I didn't understand really what he was doing until I got to my middle school and high school years when I started getting more involved and when grandpa would ask me to go and do more on the farm. And I struggled with understanding what hard work was. I struggled with understanding responsibility. And when I would watch my grandfather and I would see him at age 70 plus out there scooping manure, showing me how it's done, showing me how to cut hay bales, showing me how to feed properly, it taught me and it made me realize that, Ben, you do not know what responsibility is. You don't know what hard work is. And I will tell you that that's why one of the big things I struggled back then with was just how some people don't understand the struggles that farmers go through, the hard work that farmers go through. And it really helped me understand that. But my grandpa taught me not just about hard work and responsibility. My grandfather taught me something that I could never repay him, and that was the attitude with which you work. I never heard my grandpa complain in front of us cousins, in front of us, all of his grandsons, his granddaughters, in front of my mom or dad. He was always just happy that he has a family that loved him. He had a farm, he had those cows. And it's something that I never thought of, that having an attitude with positivity and doing that is something that is so rare and something that I struggle with today, but he lived it out. Before my grandpa died, I remember my mom sending me a video when I was in college. It was a video of my grandfather watching the corn being harvested. I felt like that video probably just wrapped everything that my grandpa was into one thing: love of farming, love of family, and love of his faith. And you might be wondering, well, Ben, isn't that what your YouTube, your media thing is? And yes, I started the journey of YouTube, the journey of the media side of things 3-ish years ago. I have a cobweb. 3 years ago, about probably this upcoming week was when I really started focusing on that and opening up. So the Bowden Experience motto is faith, family, fun. My grandpa stood for faith, family, fun. Shortly after my grandpa passed away, sorry, I had to reach for it. It's shortly after my grandpa passed away, I made these dog tags. I've talked about them before in the past, but simply it has this on there. It's this: faith, family, farming. And it has a couple Bible verses and how he'll ever be forever loved and never forgotten. It's something that I didn't really understand until about a year ago. So with that introduction of my grandfather and really what started this whole thing and everything like that, I wanted to talk about 3 things I've learned and 3 things that I've struggled with. I wanted to start by talking about the 3 things that I've struggled with. The first thing is life without him. Life without my grandfather has been very hard at times. Before I left to come here, and even the last couple of years when he's been gone, going to the farm was very hard. And to be honest, I haven't been out on the farm very often. It was very rare that I would go out in there because there were so many memories that I made, but then maybe things that I think I didn't do well enough. So that was very hard. And so the most I would do, I'd go up to his grave, and I would just sit and overlook the farm because it kind of oversees the farm, which I always think is the coolest thing. But even then, I didn't always go to his grave because there were so many things I regretted. And that leads me into number 2, and that is the frustration of times I missed out. Growing up, my mom and dad always told us that we need to spend time with the grandparents, and because you never know when they'll be gone. And I remember I would always say, "Nah, I'll be okay. I'll see him later. I'll see grandma later." And it wasn't until I hit middle school and even really more until high school when I started seeing sometimes his health would get a little shaky. Then when I went to college and his health really started getting in a tough spot. I can tell you that at college I tried so hard to make up for those times that I missed. And when he passed away, it ate at me and it just ripped me to shreds. Because I fought with myself, my inner self, saying, "Ben, you didn't do enough. Ben, you never tried. When your parents told you, you never tried to fight it. You never tried to go see him. You would rather come home and play video games. You would rather come home and go with friends than to see someone that you said meant so much to you." I say that because I realized within the last few moments of his life, within the last months and really the last year of how much he meant to me. And I tried to spend as much time as I could, but it was hard. And at times I was frustrated at myself. And it's been so hard as he's been gone, because I would think back, and especially as I've been here in Hungary, I think back of maybe what he missed when I was here. He'll miss the time of my wedding. He'll miss the time of when I have children. He'll miss the time of when I get that big job that I've always wanted. But more than that, I miss the times that I could have spent with him. Lastly, the thing that I struggle with most is having one of my best friends, someone that I can go to about the tough things in life. I don't get to talk to him about simple things like farming, simple things like what's going on at school, or the girl I'm dating, or what's next in life, or about my ministry. I don't get to call and talk to him anymore. And it's really hard. And people might tell me, and they tell me all the time, well, Ben, it's been 3 years, celebrate the good. And yes, I know that. But when someone has been so influential in your life, and when someone has been there so much, it's okay to mourn. And am I mourning less than what I was, and grieving less than what I was 5 years ago? Or 3 years ago? Yes, I am grieving a lot less, but yet I still grieve. I still mourn over someone that meant so much to me. And so if you're going through this situation and someone is telling you, well, it's been a year, move on. No. You never move on past that person, right? You're never going to move on past the person that you care about so much. But what you can do is live the life that they would want you to live. Honor them that way. And that's something I'll talk about here as we move into things I've learned. And number one thing that I have learned, and number one thing that I will never be able to ever probably change, is the fact that you can never take time for granted. I know for me, that is something that I struggled with so much, especially as he has passed on, is taking time for granted. And I want to encourage all of you, and I want to encourage you maybe that have lost somebody, and maybe that you can encourage somebody else. But I encourage you, especially if you're a young person, if you're someone that is in my age bracket, if you are someone that is in, maybe a younger adult teenager life, that you don't take it for granted, that you don't take the time that you have for granted. And what I mean by that is, if your grandparents or your aunts and uncles or your parents say, hey, can you come over for a little bit? Just let's talk, or maybe let's catch up over coffee or tea or whatever. Don't say that you have something to do. And maybe it's something very important. I get that. But if it's just to go home and play video games, if it's just to go home and hang out with your friends or your fam, or not your fam, but your friends, or you want to go do something that you've always wanted to do, maybe think about what life might be like when you don't take the opportunity to spend time with the person you care about the most. Because I can tell you that is one of the biggest regrets of my grandfather passing away. And I don't have many of them. And to be honest, for the most part, my grandpa has always still been there with me. And I truly enjoyed the time I had with him, but there are those times where I forget, or that I took time for granted. So I know I should have spent more time, and it eats at me, just like I shared, it eats at me so much. But I don't want you to make the same mistake that I did. I don't want you to make the same choices that I did. I want you to be able to take this opportunity and say, I'm going to spend more time with my grandfather. I'm going to spend more time with my grandmother. I'm going to spend more time with my mom. Ultimately, I wanted to spend more time with the people that I love, the friends that I care about. So that goes into number 2, and something that I've learned, and something that I try to apply actually quite frequently in my life, is this: remembering the good times that you had with them. And I think this is something that can kind of come in 2 tiers. I think remembering the good times is not just sitting down and going, oh, yes, I remember the time I went farming with grandpa. Because I can tell you, I could spend, again, a whole episode on the things I loved about my grandfather and the memories that I have. But one specific memory that I have that is actually, some might think it's not a good memory, but for me, it's a good memory. And that was back in, I believe I was a junior in high school. And I was tasked to clean the manure out of the pens in the barn. It was very cold. It was a winter time. And me being very non-responsible said, not responsible, I said, I'm going to clean them later. I'll clean them later at night. It'll be fine. But my dad and no one told me that, yeah, I think in a good way, that, well, when it gets at night, it gets colder, which means that, and I should have known this, means the poop is going to freeze, right? And my grandfather graciously came out and he didn't help me, but he taught me a lesson. My dad ended up coming to help me, but my grandpa sat there and just talked to me the whole time and taught me a lesson. He said these words that I will never, ever, ever forget. And I mean this with 100%. I will never forget these words. And he said this, he said, Ben, you have to learn how to respect the job before people will respect you. And I think that just didn't apply just to a job, but applies to your whole life. If you don't respect your life, if you don't respect your heavenly Father as your Lord and Savior, how is someone going to look at you and understand you live for Christ? That's how I now apply it now to this day. How, if I'm not living out for Christ, if I'm not willing to serve here on the mission field, how can someone look at me and say he lives for Christ? And so for me, that's something that I really want to encourage you is remember the good times, remember the good lessons, apply those good lessons, because there are many days where I walk around this campus here and I walk around and I think about all the good things that Grandpa has done for me, or maybe that we had together. I remember when we used to go to fairs together, those things that bring back so many amazing memories. And at the same time are so encouraging to me in ministry today, is because every memory that I had with him brought back so many amazing lessons that now I can apply to my life. And so now I want to encourage you with one more thing that I've learned, and that is celebrating life. And now I just talked about how it's okay to grieve. And I mean that. I believe it's so okay to grieve even after the years after it's gone. But I had someone come up to me here at World Life saying, hey, why don't you celebrate his life? And I believe we do as a family, but sometimes it gets kind of lonely. This week has been very hard. There's been many lonely moments. Today was a very hard day. Tomorrow's even going to be harder. But I have to remind myself that celebrating the life of my grandfather is almost more important than grieving. And what I mean by that is this, that celebrating the things that he has done for both the family and for this world is important to then remember what he has done. And my grandfather has done so many things. He's helped so many people. He's done so many people's taxes. He's taught me lessons. He's taught my cousins lessons. But ultimately, he's tried to live for the Lord in everything that he does. And he's encouraged me to do that. I remember when I switched over to education, I don't think he was too excited at first, but I remember what he said to me. He said this, he said, son, he said, whatever you decide to do, you need to do it with everything, give everything you've got. You need to do it ultimately for God's glory, but ultimately you need to do it the best of your ability. And I take that to this day and I take it to heart, and I try to honor him in everything I can and everything that I do. But there's one thing that I wanted to finish up with as I finish up this episode. There's just one thing that I struggle with the most, and I didn't put it in either one because I kind of wanted to finish with this, and that is this. There are many times where life has been hard for me, and you know those things. You know that I lost my grandfather 3 years ago, and then within a 6-month frame, I lost my cousin, Colleen. And death is something that I never really understood. I think I understood that you die, but I never think I totally understood death until I experienced it personally. And so I want to encourage you all. Please don't waste your life. I have learned this since then. I could tell you that I've really tried to change the course of my life since my grandfather passed away. I've realized that every moment is so important. So friends, don't waste your life. Family, don't waste your life. Stop arguing with that person you've been arguing with for years, get together, apologize. Because this life is too short. God tomorrow could say, Ben, it's time for you to go. God tomorrow could say to my mom, hey, it's time for you to go. To my dad, to my brother, to my family. That's why it's so important that I believe that we take the moments and the opportunity to live for Christ. My life verse is Philippians 1:21, which says, for me to live is Christ. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. I almost forgot it there for a second. For me to live is Christ. For me to die is gain. I am going to live for Christ every moment I get. And my grandfather, as I sit here, about 3 years since he's passed away, there has not been a moment in my life that I haven't thought about the things he's taught me. There hasn't been a moment in my life that there hasn't been a time where I haven't missed him. But ultimately, every moment in my life, I've tried to take every principle he has taught me and apply it to my life. So you might be asking, Ben, what was the purpose of this? What was the purpose of these last 20 minutes or so of you sharing about your grandfather and the things you struggle with, things you learned? As well, like, first, I hope you've learned something. But secondly, I hope that you have taken away this, and that is this. Don't waste your life. And I know you might hear that and you're like, well, Ben, I hear that all the time. Well, yeah, you should. But don't waste your life. Go out, share the gospel. If you don't know the gospel, talk to me. And I mean this more than anything. I've seen this with friends that what one regret they have is not sharing the gospel with their loved ones. I'm telling you, if you're listening to this and you want to know more about the gospel, talk to me, talk to my family. But seriously, come talk to me. I would hate to be in heaven and then you're not there. So I want to ask you this question is, if you die tomorrow, where are you going? Do you have that regret of never asking Christ to be your Savior? If so, do it right now and mean it. Because Jesus Christ died on the cross for your sins so that you may have a place in heaven. Think about that. My grandfather didn't deserve it. I don't deserve it. You don't deserve it. My mom and dad don't deserve it. My brother doesn't deserve it. But he gave it to you because he loves you. Think about that. So as you go on with your week, and maybe you'll listen to this, maybe you're listening to this like 7 years from now. Maybe you listen to this tomorrow or a few weeks in the future. Whenever you are listening to this, take the opportunity to listen to this, be encouraged, but be challenged. Don't waste the opportunity with your grandparents. Don't waste the opportunity with your parents. Don't waste the opportunity with your friends and family. Ultimately, do it for the glory of God. Live your life for the glory of God. So I hope this has been an encouragement to you. I miss my grandpa dearly, but I know that he's in a better place. And I know that the principles that he laid in my life are still with me today. And I can be proud and happy for that. So if you've enjoyed this podcast episode, if you've enjoyed listening, especially on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, go ahead and favorite this video. Make sure it's on the front of your screen so that way you can hear me every time I go every Thursday. And if you're listening on YouTube and you've been enjoying this video, if you enjoyed the last couple videos, then hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. So that way you're in touch with everything that's going on here at the Bowden Experience, here on the podcast, really in my life, in ministry. I really would be appreciative if you would do that because it would just let me know that you enjoy what I'm doing. So once again, I just want to encourage you by this, that yes, our life is short, but we serve an amazing God and that he is faithful and we can trust him. And as always, we'll talk next time.